Okay, guys, let's talk about wood finishes then, shall we? Here we go. So, yes, you'll see on here a lovely surfboard. Now, surfboards, actually, wooden surfboards are a really good example of a great use of epoxy resin as a finish, and that's how you get this lovely, like, glossy finish on here. Like, you can see there the light shining off it. So, yeah, let's go into this. Right. Now, the purposes of wood finishes. This is a good way to start. Is looking at like why do woods even need finishing anyway? Like the purpose of it is really to do the following. I mean, yeah, protecting wood rot and decay, and generally, yeah, like insect infestation. All this stuff is bad stuff, and you can see this is a great example here. This is a great example of like rot. In fact, I need a darker color, don't I? There we go. This is a great example of rot, and then like this is horrible like insect infestation down here. Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting actually because I mean you get timbered houses going way back, certainly in the UK, like hundreds and hundreds of years, where the timber is actually still fine, but that's because it's been treated and it's been maintained. Now, if wood is just left out in the elements without any kind of finish on, it will eventually start to rot and decay, especially if it's a very damp environment. So, how do we protect it? So it can be protected in a range of ways. Yeah, and we can look into this. So yes, I mean epoxy resin is a great example, like we looked at with the surfboard here. That completely seals the wood and keeps it totally protected from like air, and with that like moisture and insects. Essentially, it's covering the wood in a layer of yeah, I mean resin, but it's sort of like a plastic style coating. Yeah, so that's one thing. Is it's basically finishes are for protective purposes to stop wood from rotting or being attacked by insects, and the other one is aesthetic. Now the boat example here is great because this has a good combo of having aesthetic properties as well as practical. Now, this is a speedboat you get in Venice, and it's very nice. You know, they're beautifully made, like these what's called clinker built, and yeah, they have like this lovely sort of epoxy finish on the outside, but then also they have to protect it from moisture and water because it's in the water the whole time. So it has a very much a practical application as well. So let's look at different types. And yes, how exciting you're thinking. Yeah, looking at different types of wood finishes. But yes, we must do it anyway. So polyurethane varnish, and the polyurethane is actually it's a polymer. So this is essentially doing it similar to what epoxy does. So it's very similar to epoxy. It's coating the wood in a very, very thin layer of lacquer or so almost like a plastic-like resin. And so this completely seals it. So this is protective as well. In fact, I'd actually argue that sometimes these polyurethane varnishes, they do look nice. Sorry about that. But they often feel quite, I don't know, they sometimes have a slightly sticky feel to them, which is not always very nice. And they have to be sanded down and to get a really smooth finish. So it's not easy to apply this. It's not as simple as just getting a brush and brushing on. You have to put on multiple layers and sand it down, another layer, and you have to buff it up. And yeah, and these are the different finishes you can get, like gloss, satin, or matte. The other one is water-based paints. Now these are quite nice. Paints come in all sorts of different types. You can get like acrylic paints. You can get oil-based ones, water, and you can even get ones like chalk based. For chalk based is great for like stuff for kids, like especially babies, like wooden toys or something. If they're coated in chalk-based paint, it's completely non-toxic. So trouble is something like polyurethane varnishes is very toxic. So yeah, something like this is great. So yeah, water-based paints, these just put more of like an aesthetic finish. These would not be protective against rain because obviously it's water-based, it would get washed away. Acrylic is good because acrylic is, again, it's another sort of polymer base. So this is actually quite durable, and it comes in a range of colors. So yeah, and it's also pretty hard wearing as well. Yeah, so it's quite good at withstanding like knocks and bumps and stuff, and that's the same with the polyurethane varnish. Now, stains is an interesting one. Stain is it's kind of, instead of it being an external finish, so like with a paint, for example, so the blue paint, you'd have like your wood tabletop there. then what the paint does is it sort of sits on top in layers. So it actually, and the more layers you add, you actually end up like increasing the size of the table. Now, if we look at stains, for example, we have the stains here. There's the same table. Now, what the stain does is it actually sort of impregnates itself into the grain of the wood there. So it literally stains the wood a different color. And this is great if you want to sort of keep that grain pattern. You don't want to hide the grain. You want to keep the grain pattern there. It sort of enhances the look of the grain, and it does add a sort of protective element as well. And it comes in a range of colors as well. Yeah, but I mean, again, all these finishes, they're only as good as they're applied. Sometimes they can look horrendous. Okay, so other types of finishes. We've got, like color wash. This is kind of like if you're wanting to have a sort of slightly grungy, vintagey look. It's very similar to stains. It's similar to staining. It's kind of like water-based finishes. You just put on with a sponge, and it just sort of gives a sort of thin layer of color. And it still shows the grain as well, which is sometimes desirable. And same with wax as well. Now, wax is an interesting one. Sometimes you get what's called beeswax, which is natural, and you also get sort of synthetic waxes or man-made waxes. Yes, so waxes are great because they aesthetically bring out the grain of the wood, but they also add a layer of waterproofing and damp proofing as well, because wax obviously doesn't absorb moisture. So if you give a very consistent layer of wax and you add it on, then then it works really well at keeping the wood waterproof. Okay, yacht varnish. Now this is, this is essentially like similar to the polyurethane varnish there, but like yacht varnish is more similar to epoxy resin actually, because this is applied in very, very large areas. So it could be applied with a spray or a brush, depending on the size of the area you're coating. And again, this would have to be built up over layers. So you need multiple layers. In fact, to be honest, most wood finishes need layers to be done. So layering to be done there. This is very tough and completely waterproof, provided it obviously doesn't get damaged. So if it gets a crack in there, then that will let the water in. But it's easy to be repaired, because if you do get a crack or some damage on it, you can just paint over it again. So So yacht varnish isn't just used for marine applications. It's also used for things like what you can see here, used for things like window frames and doors and stuff. So it's just generally anything that's outdoors in the elements. Now, one more thing is pressure treating. So pressure treating is actually, it's a very interesting one. So you're basically using pressure to impregnate the wood with copper sulfate and preserving salts. And this is really good because it sort of deeply embeds these elements into the timber. So it's good for sort of penetrate. Whoops, can't write in that one, can I? It's good for like penetrating all the whole thickness of the wood. So penetrating the whole section. Sorry about my handwriting. It's dreadful, isn't it? Absolutely appalling. Yeah, and the main thing really with this is it protects from, all these kind of fungal attacked insects, and it lasts a long time. So whereas, say, epoxy resins and wax and things like that, those will probably need to be reapplied after a certain level of time. Pressure treating will last for literally decades, and it's great for, outdoor stuff like, decking or cladding, or if you're making like a little wooden cabin outside, like pressure treated timber is an excellent choice. Okay, so then the other ones we've got are oils, Danish oil and teak oil. So these are lovely as well, and these also give an element of waterproofing, but they're mainly for indoor use and for sort of more aesthetic, properties. So they're great. They can be applied with a cloth or a brush, and they can be really worked into the grain, so you can get it to sort of impregnate the wood quite deeply. And it enhances the grain. It's actually quite remarkable. And you can see here the examples between them. The finished and unfinished is quite a big difference, really. It really enhances the color of the timber. So down here, like other than these Danish and teak oils, the other ones we've got sort of like natural oils as well. Now these like linseed oil, olive oil, and canola oil, these are basically like they are food-based oils. I mean, canola and linseed are seeds, and then olive oil is obviously just like used for cooking. So these are really good for kitchen items. Say if you make a really nice hardwood chopping board out of maple or something, you want to give it a nice water repellent as well as aesthetic finish. Olive oil or canola oil is a great choice because you don't have to worry about the finish mixing with the food. Because say if you're chopping tomatoes on there, olive oil is what you typically use with a salad dressing anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, so the main point is that they're food safe. So there you go, guys. That is all you need to know on woods as a brief overview.